War is a big deal, and I don't just mean morally, I mean in terms of physical, literal space. It's really big, which is something that unfortunately, pretty much every film and game, and even less restricted media like comics and books, they fail to really grasp, I think, in a meaningful way. Even, historical epics like Waterloo or the old War and Peace, each of these things featuring like over 10,000 extras a pop, even they aren't enough to show just how big their chosen battles would have really been. And that lack of a sense of scale and the inherent complexities which that scale results in leads us, I think, to think of things like battlefield tactics in a more restricted way that aren't necessarily applicable to the historical reality which soldiers actually faced. And that, in turn, of course, leads to every armchair general on the internet to flood my comments with millions of genius ideas and takes on how they would fight differently than those stuffy old actual military, historical experts, only the guys whose livelihoods and literal lives dependent on those doctrines working well. What do they know? They were just aristocratic, silly, they didn't care about the lives of their men and all that sort of nonsense. Honor and idealism and yeah, I think we all know the comments that I'm talking about. So in this video, the third in my series describing some of the reasons why soldiers would fight in these large and dense linear formations rather than spreading out and fighting from cover like Sean Gibson elite sharpshooters, we're going to look at the issues of battlefield communication and maneuverability, both at the macro and on the micro scale. Of course, there are still some circumstances in which no formation will be able to save you, and for that, you're going to rely on this video's sponsor.
Hum. Oh, I sure do enjoy traveling through dark and mysterious woods that are also a stand-in for the internet while carrying large quantities of digital personal information. Oh, I'm sure that nothing could go wrong.
Ha! You never should have come here. It's your data or your life.
Oh no! Who could have ever predicted such a predicament?
I'll tell you who.
Huh? What was that? Who's there?
Da-da-da-da-da-da! 'Tis I, NordVPN, here to save the day.
Oh, my hero!
You're too late, NordVPN. This boy decided to access his banking information in a public place. His data's soon to be mine.
Not so fast, you rapscallion. This boy is under my threat protection. He went to nordvpn.com/BrandonFVPN. Bit of a mouthful, I admit, and got 4 extra months of Nord for free. Now I specialize in protecting him from malware and all sorts of harmful websites like you.
No, I can't get through Nord's data encryption. I am defeated. Ah!
Ha ha! Just another day at the office for NordVPN.
Oh, thank you, NordVPN. You've saved me again.
Why, it's no trouble at all, little Timmy. And remember, if you ever need me, I offer 24/7 customer support and a 30-day money-back guarantee on all purchases.
Oh, you sure do, NordVPN. But, Mr. VPN, could you help me with one more thing? I'm a little lost out here.
Ha ha ha! Oh, little Timmy, that's never a problem for a virtual private network. Why, with just a few clicks of your mouse, you can instantly make it look like your computer is almost anywhere in the world. You can stay at home and access content from anywhere, even if it's typically region blocked.
well, yes, but I also need to get out of the forest for real.
Oh, and I know what you're thinking, Timmy, but no worries. I never track any of your data while I'm busy keeping you safe. So until you need me again, up, and away!
Nord? Hello? Anyone? Aw, jeez.
Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. This is another sponsor that I really love because it's a company that I have used personally for many years now after seeing their ads on Internet Comments Etiquette, who is far more funny than I. And if I'm ever doing something like, traveling to a reenactment, or if I'm on a public Wi-Fi network in general, well, I'm always using them when I'm doing things like signing into my YouTube account or doing anything financial. So, strongly recommended. Visit nordvpn.com/BrandsandFVPN to check out some of their deals. And remember that it's risk risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Thank you for supporting the sponsors that support me, and now back to the video. So let's start by looking at small-scale unit tactics, in which the subdivision, or the company, is typically the smallest unit you might see acting independently on the battlefield. At least for the British Army of the late 18th century it was. As always, your specific mileage with all of this info is going to vary based on what army is being discussed, in what year, and in what environment. So treat this video, at least treat the specifics of this video, as more of a general guide, an overview from which you might continue your learning. In any case, take a look at this photograph of reenactors from the 43rd Regiment of Foot. As far as reenactments go, where sometimes you have a group of 4 people marching around pretending to be an entire regiment, this is a really solid grouping. When they're operating on the field, this body, this single solid block, that's a pretty decent representation of the scale that you might expect from a real-life subdivision in the British Army of this time. And just looking at this group, I think that you can see how their coordination might become pretty difficult, especially if they were in a real-life combat situation where the bullets are real. And that's why armies of this time period generally utilized multiple levels of communication, like musicians and multiple officers, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. But here's the thing. Including in this photograph their musicians and officers, there are 25 people in this picture. Whereas a real-life British subdivision of this time would have more than double that, roughly 60 men in total at their full strength. Now, yes, admittedly, armies were pretty much never at their full strength, so it isn't really all that realistic to use that as our, base figure. But my point here is that, if nothing else, the philosophy of military organization at this time period still had to be able to facilitate at least up to that many bodies operating together, and that if you saw a subdivision of this scale in a real-life combat scenario, it might be kind of typical, but it would also be considered a relatively small one as far as what it's meant to operate as on paper. And then, of course, keeping in mind that a lot of times subdivisions would combine together to form grand divisions, so you're dealing with large bodies of men anyways. I think you get the idea there. So just for the sake of argument, let's use that full paper strength just as a representation of my point. Picture twice as many privates, 54 men, in ranks 2 deep, marching as a single unit. To keep those men in line, there's going to be 3 officers, 6 NCOs, sergeants and corporals, and 2 drummers. If we allowed, say, 30 inches, oh, there we are. Let's say we allowed 30 inches across for each man to operate in, which really isn't an awful lot for, marching, loading, and firing. We'll multiply this 30 inches by 54 privates. I can't do that, obviously. Multiply it to the size of a full-strength subdivision at the end of 1775, 54 men. Hey, looks like I said the wrong number in the recording. Well, I never was very good with numbers. The number is 22.5 yards, 20.6 meters. It's a lot. 20 meters. It's a big deal. Even if we cut that subdivision into a half-strength subdivision, which is potentially more likely, that is still taking up a lot of physical space. Now, you can imagine how difficult it would be to navigate this even on a clear weather parade, getting all the men to move in the same way, do the same things at the same time, all that, let alone on a battlefield. And this is one of the many reasons why soldiers fighting in relatively close, orders, relatively close together, why it was so important. The further apart that these men get away from each other, the more difficult it becomes for them to coordinate, and for the officers to literally just keep track of all of them. As it is, for a CO to be heard over the noise again of a battlefield, cannon and musketry and shouting and screaming and all that nonsense, maybe not nonsense, you get the idea, you can imagine how loudly they're going to have to shout to be heard over such a wide distance. Then, of course, you're going to have those shouts be repeated, echoed down the line by, again, other officers, NCOs, those multiple levels of communication, the drummers, in order to make sure that it all gets sent out within that wide radius. If you were then to double or even triple the length of that same number of men, that same unit, by putting them into open order, not 30 inches apart, but like, twice or three times that distance between each man. I mean, it's one thing if you're dealing with small unit sizes in a skirmish, 200 guys versus 200 guys in the woods, something like that, as, for example, in the American War of Independence, would have happened an awful lot. But like, if we're talking a set piece, formal, like European field of battle with thousands, tens of thousands, even more men, I mean, yikes. And it isn't just a matter of communicating orders, from the CEO, like the captain, to the individual soldiers, or even just having them like marching forwards and backwards. I mean, certain battlefield maneuvers could get very complicated. Marching obliquely, for example, where you have the entire line shifting to the side as they advance. Men like having to step one step forward and then one step to the side, or, do one step over. There are complications when you have like 200 men all trying to move like this in the same time. Or wheeling, oh my God, for heaven's sake, wheeling, where the line is swinging like a door, like the entire line to the left or to the right, or even from a pivot point on the center, trying to spin like this. When it comes to wheeling, it is of vital importance that the men are maintaining physical touch with each other, because that's the only way to reliably have them keep track of where everyone else is in the line as they're making those wide turns. Otherwise, and trust me, because I say this from experience, it only takes one person to move a little bit too quickly, or too slowly for that matter, and all of a sudden the line is splitting into 2 or 3 different groups. And then you got a blob of people on your hands, all trying to be navigated back into a formation by the NCO, shoving everyone into line with a pike or something. Now, it's totally possible to pull off maneuvers like this, wheeling, oblique, marching, counter marching, whatever it is. It's possible to do it in open order. I've done a lot of that in open order, but then I've never been in a reenactment group with more than like 20 or 30 guys at the most, and that's a big event right there. The wider those intervals and the larger the scale, the more difficult it all becomes. And a lot of these movements are going to be taking place not only on a subdivisional scale with 20, 30, 40, 50 people, but with potentially hundreds, thousands of people all moving together in tandem. And that brings us to the macro scale, the army-wide scale. Just to make sure that we are on the same page here, when it comes to just how big and complicated these battles could get, let's take one random example. Say the Battle of Rossbach, 1757, in which a Prussian army managed to defeat an enemy twice their size, at least in part due to their army's superior control and maneuvering on the field. The Prussians were able to effectively employ their force where and when they needed them most. And, maybe that doesn't sound all that terribly impressive until you realize just how much coordination is required to control that many men and have them all on the same page. What does 20,000 men, the size of the Prussian army, what does that look like? Well, if every dot in this picture represents a single soldier, it looks something like this. Kind of hurts the eyes, doesn't it? And this isn't even in a battle that's particularly large for the war in which it was fought. Compared to some like Napoleonic battles, oh my God, this is a positively tiny force, a tiny engagement. Imagine all of those difficulties in coordinating men on the march, having the commands be disseminated properly and all that when you're dealing with, 50 or 60 people. And then scale it up to that. Keep in mind, this is an era before radio communications. The only way for you to get commands from one end of the battlefield to another is either by waving some flags, by, blaring trumpets and drums as loudly as you can, or by sending a rider to race as fast as they can with a letter of some sort. And you better hope that letter is interpreted correctly, otherwise things can get messy. And then, of course, you think about all of these little armchair strategies that people come up with for how they'd have fought wars during this time period instead. Oh, well, I would hide behind rocks and up in trees. I would use ambush tactics and guerrilla warfare, spread them all out, doing nothing but light infantry tactics. I mean, okay, yeah, sure. Maybe that works to ambush a single French column in the mountains of Spain. Maybe it works to fight a battle of a couple hundred men, up to like, oh my god, even 1,000 men in North America. But do you see how that kind of thinking doesn't necessarily apply to these much larger circumstances? You can't just have 20,000 men all operating independently as skirmishers in little groups of 30 and have them defeat an army twice their size. That would just be a field of chaos. What do you do, for example, if an enemy cavalry unit appears to just sweep right through all of those open order troops? Oh, well, the commenters would say that's easy. Just have the men form back up into the tight line. You know, when you're firefighting, better to be in open order. But then cavalry shows up. Ooh, okay, we'll form into a square. Nice and easy, right? Well, okay, yeah, sure. That's all fine if you're dealing with a couple dozen men. But what if there's an entire brigade of cavalry that's coming to threaten your entire force? Having all of those men even running to a central position to start forming up, let alone actually getting in the appropriate position, that could take ages. You could be hundreds of meters away if you have a massive army all in open order, trying to have them run back into position, and they're going to get tired out by the same thing as well. This is why fighting in closer orders, with, again, multiple different levels of battlefield organization, where you have things like subdivisions making up grand divisions, making up wings, and then battalions and brigades, so on and so forth, it's what makes it so incredibly important. Each of these levels of organization needs to have their own chain of command as well, and they need to be literally physically close enough to each other where they can not only respond to the immediate situation around them, but so that on a larger scale, they can navigate and maneuver together in literally just in a practical fashion. If every long 18th century battle was a major league game of StarCraft, then sure, the general could just be issuing individual commands to every single soldier with their million plus APM, making sure that every one of them is in like a perfect positioning and everything, perfect firing efficiency at all times. I mean, yeah, sure. But that's not the reality. It's hard enough to coordinate, 10 or 20 guys to all do the same thing at once in a reenactment. Trying to have thousands of them all spread tactically apart while also somehow acting in complete coordination with each other in an era, again, before radio or telephone communications. Heck, even before like reliable mass-produced timekeeping devices, it's impossible. It's literally impossible. How are you going to coordinate? Right, we're going to mass on this flank, push in there, and then when that's done, the right flank is going to be able to do this other action to support. It would be impossible. Any semblance of combined arms warfare, which is becoming increasingly important all throughout the 18th century, it's impossible to conduct. And combine all of that with the multiple other factors discussed in the other videos, like cavalry and the limitations of musketry and other things that we're going to talk about in future content to come, well, you can see how this whole standing in lines and shooting at each other may just have been better thought out than it's often presumed. It may just have been a necessary madness. Thank you all so very much for watching, and make sure to join me next time in this series when I discuss another vital element of why warfare was linear: morale and discipline. If you're interested in supporting this content and helping me to produce more videos like this one, well, you might consider joining up with this most illustrious corps of volunteers on Patreon, because they really are the ones who make all of this stuff possible. And if you enjoyed this video, of course, be sure to thank them just as much as you may thank me. And additionally, you can always watch these videos early and free of charge over on recast.tv, which is another great way to help support my work, because simply put, they pay me an awful lot better than YouTube does, and you only have to watch a single ad rather than all sorts of, ads in the middle of the video and whatnot in order to get the full content. So, in any case. However your support may come, be it financial with your time or even just, regular old viewing here on YouTube, whatever it is, I thank you for it. It is very much appreciated. It lets me, do the dream job, right? So, until the next time, my dear viewer, I am and I shall remain your most humble and obedient of servants.